Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Wholihan. This year's top prospect, Jackson Holliday, was promoted to the majors as a 20-year-old. He then proceeded to go 2 for 34 and was sent back down in the minors. While his career is by no means over, it just shows the expectations we have for players don't always match up with reality. I remember as a kid getting Rangers outfielder Ruben Mateo's autograph. I had him sign it on the sweet spot of an official Major League ball, which were not cheap. I was sure he would be a star. In his career, he played 295 games, had 879 at-bats, and posted a career WAR of exactly 0. Patrick Montgomery's book, Baseball's Great Expectations, looks at cases like this, of players who, for various reasons, didn't live up to their expectations. It's a brilliant idea for a book, and full of fascinating stories about some truly incredible players, and it makes you realize that these players are, in fact, people. I love the book, and I'm sure you would too. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Patrick. How you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I gotta say, this is one of those books that I am almost jealous of because it's such a great idea, and I wish I wrote it. Where did this idea for the book come from?
The idea came from being a kind of a dorky little kid that loved baseball cards, and you always wanted to see that player and know about that player before other people did. So you would always go through these stats in the card and go, this guy could really be somebody, and nobody knows about him. And then you follow him, and you swear he's going to be great. And you watch him at a game, and the sound of the bat is special, or the way he runs is special, then it doesn't happen for him. Well, what happened? Why did it happen? Was it his fault? Is there a fault at all? So I just kept thinking about that and thinking about it. And then I thought, I would love to make a team of these players, like a whole team, first base, second base. And then I sat down and I did my lineup of the all short of expectations team. I did like all 9 players. I did a bench. I did the starting rotation. I did closers, bullpen. Heck, I even did the manager. Then I realized there's a real story to be told here. And then I started beating the bushes and seeing what stories would be the most compelling. And amazingly enough, the ones that I would think would be the most compelling kind of weren't. Then when you do more research about players that you didn't know much about, you realize, wow, this is bittersweet, sad, and kind of happy in a way. So I was able to get a hold of players and get their input and buy-in into the project, and I've been very lucky with that.
I would assume, at least, that there would be some sort of apprehension on behalf of these players. I mean, you're basically saying, you didn't live up to your expectations, which is not a thing that anyone really wants to do. How did they react to being approached for the interview?
Well, what I did was I told them that I wanted to have a positive story. This wasn't about finding necessarily a fault in them or like a big sob story. I wanted to have a nice positive story where they found the other end through baseball. They found their next calling, the next life. And once I was able to get them to talk about the bad, then they were happy to talk about the good and where they were now. And for almost all the players, their story of what they're doing now is just as inspiring or just basically more awesome than what happened when they were playing. And I'm happy to report the good news in the players as opposed to the negativity and the sadness of these stories.
Well, baseball, I guess every sport, is especially a sport of failure. And I think there are honestly very few players that truly can say they left the game on their own terms, completely happy with what they did.
Nobody that signs a professional contract, even just rookie ball, is a failure. Nobody. Because the chance of just being part of that 0.5% to even go to the minor leagues is amazing. You're talking about if there was a doctor or a lawyer, you'd be paying thousands of dollars just to see them. So I hate to use the word failure because they're not. They're better than millions and millions and millions of people in this country at baseball. And they should be appreciated. And also, like, just the amount of work and time and dedication that these players have done their whole life is awe-inspiring. So the word failure or bust, I hate to use because they're not. For my last book, The Miracle of the Splendid Six, it was a book that I wrote, and David Wright did the foreword on it. It's about 6 ball players from the same area that all became major league players, all stars, and hit their 10-year mark in Major League Baseball. The chances of a player hitting their 10-year mark in Major League Baseball is 0.23 zeros 14. Like, I mean, imagine that 23 zeros, so 25 digits, 14, to become not only high school varsity, then either go to college and then get drafted and make it all the way to graduating with their 10-year mark is nearly impossible. You could go out with the rest of metal sitting on a tree and have a much better chance of being hit by lightning than what these people do. I'm just in awe of these players all the time.
That really stood out in the
Yeah,
book that these players were truly incredible. These were the best players you would have ever seen in your life,
ever.
most likely.
If you played baseball with them in rec ball, you would still be talking about them 50 years later. If you played a high school game with them, that would be the highlight of your life. Um, so yeah, I mean, these players are amazing. David Clyde, what he was able to do is just magic. And the fact that his records still stand there today from high school, I mean, these are not people that just were flash in the pans. They demonstrated high skill for a long time. And because of injuries or bad positions or just bad breaks, it didn't work out for them the way that we thought it would. But that's not a failure on them. That's a failure on expectations that fans place upon them, the teams place on them, and they even place on themselves. But just being there once again is a testament to their hard work.
I want to talk about these expectations. And this book has sort of made me rethink how I view baseball players in
Yeah,
general. Is there a way that we should approach prospects and players now after you've gone through all this research? Are we doing it wrong, do you think?
absolutely, we're doing it wrong. I think maybe this might be an unpopular opinion, but everybody is looking to make something off these players. People that buy baseball cards, they want to buy in early and get 50-fold the amount and retire one day on these players' reputations. No, these are people. They're not stocks. These general managers want to sign them for as cheap as possible they can, but get the most return from them. So they're a commodity. They're treated like, once again, a stock or just a material good. And I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to do it. And these players are their whole life they've been told they're the best and they're the best at something, and no matter what, they're always going to be as good as they are. But it doesn't turn out that way because when you're in the minor leagues, you have every player that's been told the same thing, and they're going at it pretty hard against each other. I mean, it's a team sport, but when it comes down to it, they have to outperform the guy next to them. The story of Brian Cole is kind of like that. Major league teams and general managers kind of hedge their bets, like going, you know, I want an outfielder that's 6 foot tall, maybe 200 pounds. And Brian Cole was maybe 5'8", maybe. He's listed 5'9", but I think he's really 5'8", and 160 pounds. So the Mets were like, do we go after Jason Tyner, who is slower but taller and fits the mold of what we want? Or do we go after Brian Cole, who is a much better hitter, much better power, way faster, but we can get him down in the draft and get him for a pittance of what we get Tyner because they played safe by going after the mold. And Jason Tyner was one of those players. Nothing wrong with him as a player. He made the major leagues. He's a good player. Got a huge draft bonus. Got $1 million draft bonus. Brian Cole fell way short of that. And that's because of his size and reputation. It's not fair.
You bring up the front office, and I think that a lot of this is a reflection on them just as much as it is on the players. They are just as invested, essentially, in these players' success or failure, and it reflects on their decision making. I thought it was great that you got to talk to so many people in the front office
Yeah.
instead of just focusing on the players.
I was very lucky to be able to talk to several former GMs like Brian Sabian, Jim Duquette, Tom Grieve. I mean, these were general managers that signed a lot of the players that we talked about and had huge research and expectations themselves, and their professional reputation was tied to these players. I mean, maybe their next contract for the GM was tied to the success of these kinds of players. So you talked about a lot being invested. It's not just money; it's their professional reputation on it. And they're not going to put that out there like Brian Taylor. Brian Taylor of the Yankees. Everybody throws out the word the next Sandy Koufax if they're a left-handed pitcher. And David Clyde was supposed to be the next Sandy Koufax. Brian Taylor is supposed to be the next Sandy Koufax. But if he didn't fit that mold of 6 foot plus throwing 98 miles per hour, he never would have gotten even that look to begin with. And what I find amazing, Brian Taylor, was his fastball came up like 8, 9, 10 miles per hour between his junior and senior year. He grew, I think, like a foot in like less than a year. So he was just a borderline, maybe could be an organizational depth piece to the top player in the draft and considered the best prospect since David Clyde. So it just shows how quickly these reputations and expectations change based upon size and speed that is thrown.
Were these all players you had in mind, or is there one you discovered or came across?
Well, the one player that I really wanted to kind of dig into was Danny Goodwin. He was the first pick in the draft back to back years. I mean, how does that happen? And he got drafted. He played in the minor leagues. It was a short time, then got called up. He was compared, like most young catchers, to be the next Johnny Bench. That didn't happen. He had a very middling career, didn't do very well. But when he retired, he found happiness. He has a great career. He's in his mid 70s now, I believe, and just very happy and very successful. I was not able to kind of corner him in and talk to him because he wanted nothing to do with it. And I understand that. I was trying to get Greg Jeffries, the former Met and Cardinal, but he didn't like the idea of being considered a bust or a failure. But I was explaining to him that you're not. You are a two-time All-Star, and if you look at Greg Jeffries, he had a chance to get 3,000 hits if he didn't retire so young. He was only 32 when he retired. He left a lot of meat on the bone. For him, it wasn't about failure. It's just about not meeting the expectation that the fans had. I was a kid growing up in Jersey in the mid 80s, and Greg Jeffries was the next Rod Carew, Mickey Mantle, all rolled in one. And we talked about the baseball card kind of boom. Everybody wanted that Greg Jeffries rookie card. They're buying 100 at a time, thinking that they're going to get a honeymoon out of it one day. It didn't happen, but he was still a great player. But the expectations of the fans and the front office and the other players around him didn't do it. He was a weird dude, I think, in so many ways. He was a different kind of cat than the older veterans like Keith Hernandez and players like that. He kept his bats separate. You know, he rubbed them down each game, whether or not they were used or not, with alcohol. He didn't want the bats to even travel with the other bats. He kept them separate and moved them himself. So he was a different player. His training regimen was different. I mean, we all know about the underwater swinging and his backyard batting cages that were just really strange with his father, but it worked for him. So I don't know. I was always a fan of the guy, and I was always happy when he found that really good success with the Cardinals. So I talked to him, and he just didn't want a chance that it would be a kind of like a negative story. And that's one player that I wish I could really get in that book, but maybe next time.
Well, another guy who I was surprised to see in the book, Ben Grief. Same as Greg Jeffries, really nice career.
Yeah.
An interesting thing that was brought up is he played in the steroid era, and he very vehemently said, I did not do steroids, and
Hmm.
whether or not that really sort of impacted his career. And maybe he could have lived up to these greater expectations had he chosen to do that.
Yeah. In the book Juiced by Jose Canseco, he singles out Ben Grieve as a player that should be on steroids. He should have used them. And if he did, he would have been an absolute superstar. And he heard about like, hey, your name is dropped in the book by Jose Canseco. He was scared. He's like, what? I didn't do anything. Why am I in the book? So he mentions literally like pulling off on the way to spring training and stopping at the bookstore, just reading it there in the aisle and to see why his name's in the book. And he was relieved to know he was in there because he didn't take steroids, which he knew, but he didn't want to be accused of that. So I love that story. But he does kind of mention the fact that maybe, he should have maybe good thought about it because all the other players are doing it and they all got big contracts and whatever. But he's super, he doesn't like regret not using steroids, but he just knows that it was all around him and other players did very well with it. And even players like Andy Pettit, who admitted to using some PEDs, people forget about it very easily because he was doing it, according to him, not for himself, but to get better for the team and get back from injury. Steroids is a very hard issue. When I talked to Tom Grieve, his father, who was the general manager that actually signed Jose Canseco with the Rangers, I mean, Tom Grieve, he doesn't say, I know for facts players were on him, but he's like, yeah, I know the steroids in the clubhouse. I think certain players did them, but back then we didn't test for them, so I couldn't do anything about it. During that time is a very sticky point with steroids, and I'm glad the steroids are seemingly out of the game. But you look out there, there's a lot of players that do not have a natural physique. They just look way swollen. So are they literally just ahead of the next cycle on some sort of PED? I don't know. And I hope it's not true. I hope that they're all playing on the up and up. But it's a real stain on baseball right now, I think.
I grew up in Detroit.
Yeah.
And so Cale Orge
Oh,
is a guy who, even the mention of his name, is a guy I hadn't thought about for a long time. But it just
yeah.
brought this sort of like, oh man, like he was supposed to be the guy. He really was. He has a heartbreaking story. And I didn't know any of this. Any
So
of it.
what did you think of him when he was coming up? Like, what kind of player did you think he would be?
I thought he was going to be the starting shortstop. I thought he was going to be a starting shortstop in a few years. I thought he'd probably hit, 280-ish, 15 home runs a year, great defense, all-star level kind of guy. That was
Yeah.
sort of the expectation we all had around him. And I remember him being drafted, and he had to go off and do his missionary work. And it's like, okay, well, he must really, really be worth it if they're willing to invest all of this in him. And he just kind of petered out. And it was really, I look back now and I still almost angry, which is a weird
Yeah.
response.
No, I understand.
It's a
Yeah.
weird response.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Well,
that's how,
did
yeah.
you feel angry at him at the time, or did you feel angry at just not knowing what happened?
Well, so both, honestly, both. I mean, when I was a fan growing up, it was like, why didn't you pan out? We invested in you. You were supposed to be the guy.
Yeah.
And now I read his story and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I think that you were mishandled. You did everything right. You played through pain.
Yep.
You did so much to try to make this work. And
Did-
it's also great to hear that he seems like he's doing well.
He is one of the nicest guys that you could ever talk to. He is genuinely a really good person. And I don't throw that around easily at all, because a lot of times you meet these athletes or celebrity, whatever, and you're like, oh, it's kind of not what I thought. And with him, he's everything and more that you would ever imagine he would be. And he's not a baseball player. He was just a good person. And that was great to see. But with him, though, like I asked you about what you thought he would be as a hitter. Like you said, 280, 15 home runs or so. When you look at him in high school and in college and when he was healthy in the minor leagues, he was more like not the average, but more like a Nomar Garcia Parra kind of hitter. Not A-Rod. I mean, A-Rod is a special case, but he had very good power. He had really good doubles power, gap power, and he could hit for average. And he was super fast. He could steal a lot of bases. I'd say 90% of the time he was way down severely by injuries. But there were spurts where he felt good. And when you look at his stats for that, he easily could have been one of those young, power hitting studs at shortstop. Like I asked him about that. Like people always said that you're a bad hitter, low average, no power. And he's like, no. He's like, I always thought of myself as a power hitter. And I found that fascinating. So I went back and kind of verified what he said, and dang, he's right. And his story kind of hit me hard because he could have been a first round pick coming up out of high school. But he said, he was honest. He's like, no, I'm doing my Mormon trip. But they offered him, hey, we'll draft him in the first round. And he turned down. And then again, when he was draft eligible, like a year and a half later, he said, it has to be a good deal for me. And he got drafted, I think it was the fifth round. But what's amazing is his draft bonus was second for all shortstops that year. So they invested $1.5 million in his draft bonus, which was first round bonus money. So he was regarded as a top shortstop that year in the draft, although I think he was like 22nd overall taken as a shortstop. So he was so highly regarded and so highly thought of, but he goes out there and very quickly tears his rotator cuff again and doesn't really know it, and they don't want to say anything. He tore his labrum on top of it, and just these injuries. And he wants to play, so he kind of doesn't admit what's going on. And he's like, I need surgery now. And they're like, no, wait till the end of the season. Then he gets to the end of the season, like, oh, no, 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 you don't need it. We'll play you through next year. And just kept going on and on and on till his shoulder simply exploded. And there's no other way to say it otherwise. And that's a sad story because he was on the cusp of being called up a couple times and it didn't work out. And when you look at his family, his uncle, was playing the World Series. His father was he has a huge cult following. His brother was a first round pick of the Astros. I think his other brother was also playing in the minor leagues. So his family was a huge baseball family with a lot of success. And Kale was probably the best of them as far as talent. And right now, he's a mortgage broker in Atlanta, I believe. He might be transferring to Nashville, I believe, soon. But he has a wonderful family, beautiful wife, beautiful kids. He's living his dream, and that's not baseball right now, and that's okay.
And that's what I took away from your book,
Yep.
that these are humans at the end
Yeah,
of the day. And we view them when they're on the field as gods, that they don't live in the same world as us.
you can never
And
convince me that Steve Balboni is not a god. You cannot convince me of that. To me, to the 12-year-old me, Steve Balboni walks on water, and he always will.
no, but you're right. You're right. And they are very human at the end of the day. And I think that we constantly lose sight of that as fans.
Yeah.
And to me, that was my big takeaway from the
No,
book.
and it's not fair to the player either, because the more we treat them like that, they kind of retreat into a shell, and we never see the real them. I love Derek Jeter. After Mickey Mantle, he was my favorite Yankee. I love Don Mattingly, but Derek Jeter was amazing. And that's kind of the one criticism I have on him was he never really showed his real emotion, his real self. And it's such a robbery to the fans to not see who he is, because by all accounts, he's an amazing, good person. So I just wish that we can get real talk from him back when he was playing. And I think that we were robbed of even greater from him because of that.
It's funny. I never liked Jeter because of
Really,
that. Yeah.
yep, yep,
I love those Yankee dynasty teams.
yep.
He always rubbed me the wrong way.
Because
And
corporate speak, word salad. Yeah,
but you know what? For him, that was probably the right choice. I mean, what did he have to lose? He became an icon because he followed the Jordan method of just kind
yeah.
of not saying anything controversial. I think I'm the only Yankee player that doesn't like Derek Jeter.
You're
But
the only person. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
And I think Aaron Judge is kind of getting in that territory now with the way he speaks. And I hate that because when he first came up, Aaron Judge was honest. He's like, hey, my first year, I had 50 at bats. I didn't do very well. I kept my batting average on my phone to remind me to get better. We don't hear that speak from him anymore. We don't hear that emotional, just, I feel that way. And it's bothersome to me. Like, Aaron Judge is a great player, but I want to hear him just be more open and honest and just let us in a little more.
yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk really quickly about Ron Nietzsche, the most incredible game pitched in history, I think.
That was the one player that I had no knowledge of until I started researching on this book. And I was shocked. He 27 strikeouts, perfect game, didn't even realize he was doing it. And at the end of the game, he had no idea why everybody was so excited. And like, this never happened before on any level of baseball. Any level. I mean, now in high school, I don't think it's ever happened. So any level in professional baseball, there have been hundreds of thousands of games since 1875, whatever it is. And remember, back in the day, they had a lot more minor league teams, and it's never happened before, and it'll never happen again. I mean, I don't care if it's Nolan Ryan playing a JV team. He will never strike out 27 batters. It won't happen. So that story was amazing, and he enjoys kind of that celebrity of it. He's 92 years old, and he loves talking about it, and I'm glad that he still talks about it. But he's super humble about it in the same breath. So I find that really amazing. And also, there's a story in the book about how he was warming up before the game, and he didn't really want to pitch that day. He had ulcers, his stomach was bothering him. He felt like he had nothing, and goes out there and does that. It's like David Wells, right? Goes out there hungover or maybe even drunk, and the perfect game. which I was at, by the way. I was at that perfect game.
Oh,
I
no
was,
way.
yeah, I was one of the bleacher creatures that day. My wife and I were soon to be engaged, and she's like, why is everybody so why do they lose their mind? It's a boring game. I'm like, what do you mean it's boring? Look at the scoreboard. What do you see? Nothing, all zeros. I'm like, yes. So that was the seventh inning, and after that, she was banging on the bleachers like everybody else, and that's kind of when I knew this is a good woman to marry. And yeah, so I saw that game live right there, and it's probably the second or third greatest thrill of my life.
Important question. Did you get a Beanie Baby?
I did, but I gave it to a kid because I didn't want a Beanie Baby, like so. Yeah, like one of those things. And like also, I had the ticket stubs, and like some kid asked for it. And I'm like, sure, take a ticket stub. I don't care. And silly me, But to me, the I don't take the financial stuff with that. Like the memory of it is just all that matters, and super happy with that.
Was there a player whose story you were really surprised by and you really ended up liking, or a favorite story from the book that you had from one of these guys?
I've become friends with Brian Milner. He's the catcher of the story, and I didn't really understand because people don't talk about it. But he's the only non-pitcher to go direct from high school to the major leagues. I mean, there have been several pitchers like David Claude and others, but he's the only position player to ever do that. And he wanted to play in his high school all-star game so bad that he refused to sign a contract. So that night after the game, and there's pictures in the book of him signing his contract after the game, and then the next morning he's on an airplane to meet the Toronto Blue Jays to start playing. I mean, imagine that, just high school all-star game the night before. The next day you're in a major league stadium, getting ready to play for the Toronto Blue Jays. To this day, he's still the youngest Toronto Blue Jay, and he still has the highest average. His average is 4.44 over I think 9 at bats, but that's amazing to me. And to this day, again, he's the only catcher ever to go straight from the draft to the big leagues, and that includes college. Like you hear about, Charles Johnson, I think, could have probably done it, but he's the only one to date, even college players that did that as far as catcher. So that was amazing. And when you talk to him about it, the one story that I love, and once again, it's in the book, his last major league hit was a triple. So he hits the ball right in the gap and bounces off the wall, and he chugs on in. Now, as a catcher, he was super fast. That's why he wanted to make sure that we all knew that he could run down the line as a catcher faster than the base runner and beat the runner to the base to protect the overthrow. He's super proud of that. But as he chugs around to third base, slides in, the coach is like, "Hey, stand up, tip your hat." He's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "They're giving you a standing ovation." And imagine that, being like 18 years old, a week out of high school, and there you are getting a standing ovation from an away crowd, not the hometown crowd, but an away crowd. I mean, that is a great welcome to the major leagues, but sadly, it turned out his goodbye to the big leagues as well. He never made it back. I found that story to be heartwarming, gut wrenching, and he's probably my favorite story in the book.
He seems just like the nicest guy.
He is, like once again, like a killer. I didn't think that these people could be as nice as they are. I talked about the going a couple weeks ago to see the Yankees. Brian Milner and I went to a Mets game, first Yankees, and his stepson is one of the batting coaches for the Mets. He and I sat there, and he dissected the game like in a way that I could never see the game. I learned more in that 2.5 hours watching a game with him than I could by researching any book or anything. So I love talking to him. And that night we went to dinner. I spent the night at the house with his family, and just an amazing all around great person. And I hope that comes through with the story.
Yeah. One more for you here. Kind of a big question. Has this changed the way that you think about baseball after going through this book?
Well, my first book, The Baseball Miracle, The Splendid Six, kind of did that as well because, like I talked to David Wright, Malcolm Dyer, Mark Reynolds, and these are players that you just put on a pedestal. And you find out that although they're super famous and rich, successful, they're kind of just want to be left alone. They're just kind of just people just like you and me. So I was kind of deprogrammed from thinking of them as baseball gods all the time. But with these players, I think I approached them with even more respect because these were the players I grew up on, and I was scared to know about them in some ways. I was afraid to pull back the veil on them. Almost 100%. Each time that I pulled back the layers, I was super pleased with what I saw.
That was Patrick Montgomery talking about his book, Baseball's Great Expectations, out now. To close us out, Liam Wholihan reads his poem from our latest issue.
When I leave and you're me. Fresh dragged down, the rough holes patched, mixed thin and holding together. Look up, dummy, we work in heaven. That shed's actually a whole middle school. Clouds make it in the elms so little with how close they hover, clot light and tangle one another. I needed the diesel chug zero turn to stall under me in the overthick outfield. Its blades to sputter up clumps they couldn't cut to notice. All it'd take now to convince me the sky is a river would be a way to fall into it and drink. The sand pro, lolly throttling and bucking, managed to sweep its own tire tracks with each circle I drug closer. The chalk we laid stuck. The promised rain simply passed sheepish behind our shoulders. And not a footprint left between us laying our batter's boxes, foul lines, what I'm willing to call a circle-perfect pitcher's mound. Don't let the coaches bother you. I only listen to umps and the blind man who feeds the stray tabbies by the maintenance shed. You'll find them sleeping on the hood of the darkest car in the lot. This year it's always been me. I leave my name in the trunk when I put on my gloves. Try it tomorrow. No one asks.
Thanks for listening. We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast, and our Lit Mag publishes around 50 writers every year. You can help support us on Patreon. Until next time.